All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back into my little spot here. Got your host, Chris, coming at you from Alabama. And I got my man, the Wilder historian, back here with me tonight, the legend, Lucas Wilder. Man, Lucas, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine and dandy, Chris. I'm happy to be here. How are you?
I'm great, man. I look forward to this every 2 weeks. I'm so pumped tonight. So we have something a little bit different we're going to do this time as opposed to different or just a single battle. We're going to do, he's going to do an overview for a campaign for us. So the North Virginia campaign, it's been said it was a stroke of military genius. This is Lee's best campaign, in my opinion. Is it the best one of the war? I mean, is it better than Vicksburg? I mean, how does this campaign rank in history towards other ones?
For Lee, it is his greatest campaign, in my personal opinion, and the opinion of many historians. There just doesn't get too many better examples of excellently conducted military maneuvers than what Robert E. Lee does in the Northern Virginia campaign. To compare it to Ulysses S. Grant's Vicksburg campaign, I don't think they can be compared because they're completely different styles of campaigns. And the determination I would actually have to give to Grant over Lee in that instance. However, both of them are extensive strokes of military genius to either capture or defeat a fairly substantial force.
Okay, so how does it start? Let's lead off from the beginning.
Well, when we have to start with the summer of 1862, and we have to start with the Peninsula.
Okay.
George McClellan has transported the Army of the Potomac to the Peninsula in Virginia, and he fights his way all the way up the Peninsula with Joseph E. Johnston fighting every step of the way, defending the Peninsula, but being pushed back by Union forces all the way to Richmond. McClellan makes it to Richmond. And when he's on the outskirts of Richmond, he's getting the information from the Pinkerton Detective Agency that claimed that the Confederates had anywhere from double to triple their actual number. And Alan Pinkerton was a Scotsman. He had immigrated from the United States and did some police work, and then he created his own police force for hire. And they got national attention, even hiring women to be spies and detectives. One of their most famous operations was when they supposedly uncovered a plot to kill Abraham Lincoln on his trip from Illinois to Washington, D.C. in Baltimore. They convinced Lincoln and his retainers to put him on a different train. But that's how he kind of came to prominence, and he becomes one of the main spies for McClellan. And one of the reasons McClellan keeps on expecting Lee and Joseph E. Johnston to have more troops than they actually do is because the Pinkertons are giving him that information. And so McClellan kind of stays stagnant outside of Richmond, and this allows for things like Jeb Stuart's first ride around the Union Army, which he actually rides around and through the Union Army right outside of Richmond. And it also sees Joseph E. Johnston being wounded. Sorry, and I just got done talking about Shiloh, where Albert Sidney Johnston just got killed. So forgive me. And Joseph E. Johnston gets wounded, and he is replaced by Robert E. Lee. Lee's definitely more aggressive than Johnston, and he formulates a plan to drive McClellan away from Richmond. Over the course of a week, known as the 7 Days Battle, Confederate forces slam into the Army of the Potomac, many times failing to gain the main objective, but scaring McClellan into moving his men further away. This will foreshadow Robert E. Lee's tactics as the war progresses. It's a hard-hitting style that debilitates his own forces, but most of the time was able to drive off the enemy. And when we talked a couple weeks ago, we talked about John Bell Hood. And if you notice, if you watch these videos in sequence, you'll realize that Hood is doing a lot of what Lee has showed him through his actions during this Northern Virginia campaign. And so that's the situation as we kind of move into the Northern Virginia campaign. This is what's happened just prior. Lee has forced McClellan back down the peninsula, and Lee is now going to go on the offensive, his first offensive as commander of the army. And
I'll ask you one quick question.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt you. When for Davis to put Lee in command, was that not a bold decision to have the enemy at the gates and you bring a guy from desk duty to take command of the army?
It was, if you've been following my Leonidas Polk series, Davis, Leonidas Polk, Albert Sidney Johnston were all in the same class together, and the class right before them was Robert E. Lee's class. They knew each other, and they knew each other's strengths and each other's weaknesses. It was a bold move in that Lee hadn't really stood out in anything up until that point. He had actually went into what's now West Virginia and did some campaigning, and had failed. I won't say complete failure. He just wasn't successful in Western Virginia, and so he gets moved to a desk duty. And from what a lot of historians have said, Davis could have actually just put him there as a substitute. Just put him in there, wait and see what happens. We'll find somebody better later on. What was going through Davis's mind, anyone can speculate, but was Lee going to be the permanent commander? It doesn't seem like it. I think Davis might have had someone else in mind. Who that could have been, I'm not sure. But Lee quickly gains the favor of Davis and the rest of the Confederacy because of the Northern Virginia campaign. That's extremely important to keep in mind. Lee is able to drive away McClellan from Richmond, and when he goes on this offensive campaign that's extremely successful, this wins him in the hearts of the Confederates.
Okay.
Now, something that is really very important happens right after the 7 Days Battle. There is a reorganization of both armies, basically. Lee reorganizes the army after the 7 Days Battle. Instead of having multiple divisions, he divided the divisions into a left and a right wing. The left wing commanded by Stonewall Jackson, and the right wing commanded by James Longstreet. Now, this added up to somewhere around 55,000 men total when you factor in Jeb Stuart's cavalry. So this is a brand new organization of and what's now called the Army of Northern Virginia. Completely brand new way of doing things. And we see the same thing right before the Battle of Shiloh when Albert Sidney Johnston reorganizes, or PGT Beauregard actually formulates that plan to reorganize the army, but they reorganize it right as you're getting ready to go into battle, and sometimes it causes a little chaos because commanders are getting used to this new style of organization. Jackson and Longstreet take to it pretty well. Now, the Union are actually having to kind of reorganize, and maybe reorganize is not the best word. They're having to amass troops from various points in Northern Virginia. John Pope, he had served in the Western Theater for the Union and was given command of the Army of Virginia. It was made up of a conglomeration of troops from multiple departments, like the Shenandoah Valley, the mountains of West Virginia, and troops located in and around Northern Virginia, kind of the Washington, D.C. area. And he was even going to be given elements of the Army of the Potomac, and Burnside's corps was coming up from North Carolina. So he was going to be given a huge force. If he could mass that force together, he was going to have somewhere around 130,000 men once they all came together. This was a scary proposition to Lee, and Lee found out a lot of this information, particularly with Mosby. Mosby had actually been captured and was doing a prisoner exchange and had saw a lot of these boats coming in and saw the transports and knew that something big was happening. And so Robert E. Lee is determined to defeat these armies in detail, section them off away from one another and defeat them there. He knows he is not going to be able to go up against a major Union force. Lee only has about 55,000 men, as we said earlier. Lee will actually stop him from amassing those 130,000, and Pope will only have about 70,000 when he finally brings them to battle, the Battle of Second Manassas. So that's kind of the reorganization. Both armies are kind of having to rethink how they're putting together these armies. Now, the movements towards the Northern Virginia campaign is in mid-July. This is about 2 weeks after the 7 Days Battle. Lee has sent Jackson with his wing north. He's splitting his force. Himself and Longstreet will stay at Richmond because, remember, McClellan's still on the peninsula, and he does not know if McClellan's going to move or not, but he's got to find out more information about Pope's whereabouts and how much how many troops he's getting in. Jackson and Jeb Stuart are going to be the ones on this mission going north. They fought the Battle of Cedar Mountain. It's a small but costly battle. Both sides would pull back. One of Jackson's division commanders will be killed or mortally wounded and die later. Both sides will pull back after the Battle of Cedar Mountain. Jackson pulls back to Gordonsville, and Pope will pull back to Culpeper Courthouse. It would be in Gordonsville in mid-August that Lee and Longstreet would meet up with Jackson, and they would plan their attacks against Pope. Pope is judged a little too harshly, in my opinion, and this part of the campaign, he's just given a brand new army. He was attempting to concentrate a diverse group of corps spread out over a large area and still protect his communications with Washington, and still trying to keep routes open for his reinforcements to meet with him. He's having to do a whole lot. Now, he does have some faults. I'm not taking that away from him, but I do think he's judged a little too harshly. What would any other commander be doing in this situation when he's having to amass this huge 130,000 man army, and they're coming from all different directions? It's not exactly his fault. Stuart raided and scouted around Pope's army, and there's actually a funny story about Stuart. Him and his staff almost get captured near Verdersville, and he will lose his hat and his cape, his nice plumed hat. Stuart will go on a raid and actually capture Pope's luggage and capture his uniform for that as kind of retribution. So, but Stuart on this raid will find out that Pope's right flank is fairly weak and it could be attacked. And so Lee sent Jackson to outflank Pope. Jackson is supposed to cut as much communication lines that he can with Washington, D.C. and Pope. Cut that communication line, destroy as much as you can, and hopefully we can bring him to battle somewhere before reinforcements will get to Pope. That's the plan. And so Jackson goes to Manassas Junction, right next to the location where he got his famous nickname, Stonewall. Jackson moves to Manassas Junction, raids a bunch of railroad cars. His men are eating great. One of the soldiers comments that they eat a lot of canned peaches, which is, canned goods are fairly new at the time as far as being in those metal cans. I always make the comment, if you look at Van Camp's beans, I think it says established 1861 or 1860. That's a significant time because that's right as the Civil War is breaking out, and it's a main food source for many of these soldiers, these newly canned goods. And so Jackson's men get a lot of canned peaches they find in some railroad cars there.
Oh.
Jackson will, once he raids around Manassas Junction, Pope will try to find him, and he kind of disappears north of the First Manassas battlefield. Pope has lost contact with the enemy. He doesn't know where Jackson's at, but he's determined to try to find him. He's got his troops kind of spread out. He's actually got a division, actually a couple divisions near Thoroughfare Gap. So Jackson is kind of hid away right along that road between Thoroughfare Gap and Manassas Junction. Jackson's behind a unfinished railroad cut. There's some misnomers. Some misnomers. He's not in the railroad cut. It was too deep that his men could actually get kind of overtaken if they were actually inside the railroad cut. So on the eve of this battle, he's concealed his forces just behind the unfinished railroad cut, looking south, kind of a southeast direction, and he sees some Union troops moving down the Warrenton Turnpike just a few hundred yards away from him. And so are any questions so far?
Yeah.
I've thrown a lot of information at you so far.
Oh, you said it was behind it. So his whole corps was behind the railroad cut?
Some parts were actually inside in the railroad cut if the railroad cut was shorter because the railroad cut was shorter in some places. So at some points they were in it, but many of them were actually behind the railroad cut. And when the battle takes place, they'll be firing at each other across that railroad cut, and some going into it. But it was just too scary of a situation to be trapped inside of a railroad cut with the enemy up above you.
When you mentioned that one battle they had, was there any other skirmishes that took place between the two armies?
there's tons. There's small skirmishes that take place. Jackson is having skirmishes all the way around Gordonsville and Culpeper Courthouse, trying to feel out Pope's army, and that's what gets Pope kind of anxious to go after Jackson. All this stuff is happening. He's kind of losing contact with Jackson. Jackson's wonderful at moving armies. We learned that with the Shenandoah Valley campaign. He's absolutely wonderful at throwing troops into one gap and through the mountains into another location. And so Pope is trying to find him, and he will. It's coming very quickly, because as the troops under Rufus King, it's a Union division under Rufus King, are moving down the Warrenton Turnpike. They're moving east from Thoroughfare Gap more towards Pope's position. Jackson actually rides out of the tree line in front of the railroad cut and actually watches the Union soldiers. So you can imagine, I mean, this is a high-ranking general within a few hundred yards of the enemy troops, just watching them. And he watches them for a few minutes, determines it's a fairly sizable force. He rides back to his officers and says, "Gentlemen, bring up your men." And we get the Battle of Broner's Farm. The Battle of Broner's Farm is highlighted by a lot of historians and a lot of Civil War buffs, simply because it's one of the more amazing times when two of the more famous brigades meet one another in battle. The Stonewall Brigade is the first one to engage those Union forces, and the Stonewall Brigade runs up against the Iron Brigade. And so those two will actually duke it out at Broner's Farm, right across from one another. If the listeners get a chance, I've got an entire animated battle map of Second Manassas, and it has the Broner's Farm, and it shows details of which units were where, and shows that battle between the Iron Brigade and the Stonewall Brigade.
Oh, I've got to check that out.
Yeah,
I've not seen it, but I got to really look at it again.
Both sides flung lead at each other, and neither one really budged. The Stonewall Brigade and the Iron Brigade, they're not the only ones in this fight. There's other brigades involved, but we see them. No one's really given up an inch until Tolliver's brigade helps to outflank the Iron Brigade. But it's still the Union Brigade does not back down. They just kind of pull back a couple hundred yards and reinforce their right flank and keep fighting. They only stop fighting when night comes, and you can see lanterns on the battlefield that night as men are finding their wounded. The Stonewall Brigade. Now, a brigade, in theory, a regiment's supposed to have 1,000 men in it. Of course, with campaigns, you're never going to get 1,000 men unless it was at the very beginning of the war. And so we will see the Stonewall Brigade, after the Broner's Farm, will go down to about 400 to 500 men. So they're supposed to be, there's 3 or 4 regiments in a brigade, or 4 or 5 in the case of the Stonewall Brigade. Regiments in a brigade theoretically supposed to have around 4,000 or 5,000 men in a brigade. Like I said, of course, that doesn't happen because of campaigns. But to only have around 500 men in an entire brigade, that's pretty destructive. And we will see after Second Manassas, they fight again at Antietam, and then they fight again at Fredericksburg, just months apart. These regiments are beaten up extensively, and they have just came from the 7 Days battle just a month earlier. So, I mean, think of all this heavy marching and heavy fighting that's done in this last half of 1862. Some of the most brutal fighting done in the entire war.
Wow.
So the next day, Pope he thinks he's found Jackson, which he has, but he thinks he's found Jackson's rear guard. He thinks Jackson's on the run. Little does he know, Jackson is just preparing for an even bigger fight. So it was August 29th. August 28th was Broner's Farm. August 29th opens, and Pope sends multiple divisions against Jackson's lines. And again, you can see all these smaller maneuvers that I'm not going to go into vast detail on in that animated battle map that I have. And the reserves they break through Jackson's lines, and reserves have to be brought up for the rebels to push back the Union forces. One of the hardest hit is the South Carolinians under Maxcy Gregg and part of A.P. Hill's division. And one of the more famous moments of that engagement is when A.P. Hill's men are running out of ammunition, and he goes to Jackson saying, "My men are running out," and Jackson simply says, "I expect you to hold it." It's in this battle that the Confederates are using that the Confederates that run out of ammunition are using rocks to beat back the Union attacks,
God.
and they're able to do so. It's an amazing affair, and many of these fights are hand to hand. But Jackson's able to hold on long enough, and he hears that Longstreet's on his way. He's just came through Thoroughfare Gap, and Stuart has been sent to go guide them to the battlefield. Jackson tells him, "You need to link up with my right flank, and we'll flank the entire Union Army here right now." And so Stuart rides off. He finds Longstreet, brings him to the battlefield, and Longstreet and Lee go and investigate. Where are they going to set up? Lee goes off by himself to investigate, and a sniper nearly kills him. He gets a scrape on the cheek from one of the sniper's bullets. And
Oh.
Stuart will tell Longstreet where to set up, where to deploy his men, and he rides south along this road. And he's going to try to find, the Union lines, try to see where's the best option to attack. He rides down this road, and all of a sudden he comes in contact with two Union corps marching down the road that Longstreet's men are getting ready to deploy on. And Longstreet's going to be in trouble because his men have yet to deploy fully. So if these Union forces get there, it's going to throw off the entire battle. The entire plan that Longstreet and Lee have put together is going to be put down the drain. And so Stuart will throw out a skirmish line, a very stiff skirmish line. Then he orders his men to cut down trees and drag the small trees and drag them behind his horsemen, and to throw up a lot of dust. That's going to make those two Union corps think that there's a large Confederate force coming down that road, which there is a fairly good force, but it's the right flank of the force, so it's not very secure. It actually scares the Union corps enough that they turn back around.
Wow.
And saves Longstreet's right flank. And so Longstreet's deploying his men. It's taken a while. He's having to deploy his entire wing. It's getting late in the day. This is one instance where Longstreet is actually requesting to move forward and be a very aggressive attacker, and it's Lee that holds him back and says, "No, we need to kind of test out this situation." That doesn't stop an action from happening. There's actually a battle that happens mainly with Hood's division right on the Warrenton Turnpike, right where Broner's farm, a little bit to the east of where Broner's farm took place. So the next day opens with August 30th, and Pope is watching through his binoculars, and he's seeing that there's ambulances going towards the rear. He says, "Aha, Jackson's on the run. We bloodied him the day before. He's on the run. We've got to attack him now." And so he throws his left wing and back up. He throws his right wing at Jackson, exposing his left. His left is concentrating on Jackson with Longstreet right on the flank and is going to roll him up. And that's what happens. Longstreet pushes against General Reynolds before famed him getting killed at Gettysburg and taking a wonderful command at Fredericksburg. He gets hit by Longstreet's attack, and with the help of Jackson, Longstreet and Jackson push them off the field. It's an amazing victory. The Union casualties is about 14,000 casualties for the Union out of about the 62,000 that were fully engaged. He had about 70,000 men on the field. The Confederates lost about 1,000 killed and about 7,000 wounded out of about 50,000. So the Union lost about 22% of their force. The Confederacy lost about 16% of their force. That's not the end of the battle. Well, it's the end of that battle, but there's still action that takes place. We see the Battle of Chantilly. Jackson, just a day or two after, actually 2 days after the Battle of Second Manassas, Lee sends Jackson on another flanking maneuver. He's going to try to get Jackson in between Pope and Washington, D.C. The Battle of Chantilly kind of thwarts Jackson's attempt. It doesn't work out the way that Lee and Jackson wanted it, but it would kill one of the Union's most experienced commanders, Philip Kearny. And once that's over, within another couple of days, Lee has already started his invasion of the North, his first invasion of the North that will end in the Battle of Antietam. The Union forces under the Pope will be taken down as commander. McClellan will be put back as commander as the Army of the Potomac, and Lee and McClellan will have another round at Antietam. But that's the Northern Virginia campaign, an absolutely fast-paced, moving, and hard-hitting campaign that you don't see in any other location. Jackson's Valley campaign is kind of similar, and I think because Lee and Jackson were in such good communication during the Valley campaign, Lee knew that Jackson was capable of doing these maneuvers, and that's why he chose him to do this by himself, and he stayed with Longstreet. Not saying he didn't know Longstreet, but Jackson had been able to prove himself previous to this campaign.
Wow. So would you say this right here had more to do with Jackson's ability and Lee trusting in him as opposed to the overall or Lee's overall strategy? I don't know if I asked that question.
Might need to rephrase it.
Did this campaign did its success have a lot to do with Jackson and Lee being able to trust in him and his abilities as opposed to, say, stayed with Longstreet?
I think the best way to kind of describe this campaign and the success that it garners is that Jackson, Stuart, and Lee work extremely well together.
Okay, that's what I was kind of asked. I went the wrong way about asking it. Sorry.
No, it's all right. We've talked on previous episodes. Lee and Stuart knew one another very well. Stuart was invited to Lee's house while Lee was superintendent of West Point and Stuart was a student, and so they knew each other very well. And Lee trusted him. Stuart had made many raids around and through the Union armies. Up to that point, he had done great service. And so with Stuart able to locate Pope's army and give clear information and also stopping those two Union corps from coming down that road and hitting Longstreet in the flank, the coordination between Stuart, Lee, and Jackson, they had great communication. The coordination they put forward during this campaign made it the success that it was. I'm not going to take anything away from Longstreet. Again, I don't think Lee knew what to think of Longstreet. And again, I told you, Longstreet was aggressive in this battle. He wanted to deploy his men and push them into the night to take on Pope. However, that doesn't materialize. Lee kind of holds him back, afraid that night's going to catch them and it'd just be a bigger mess to try to clean up, which that could have been as well. But Longstreet and Lee were at the front ranks trying to figure out how best to launch their assaults against Pope and end this battle decisively. And remember, Lee is fighting against time. He knows that Pope is going to get a lot more forces, and if he doesn't strike now and strike decisively, he's going to be outnumbered in a huge way, and he's not going to be on the ground he wants to fight on like he would with Burnside, who has a huge army, over 100,000 men, but Lee is able to throw up a defense that he's satisfied with, that he can fight off that large of a force. If he's going on the offensive, that number needs to be more even, and that's what he does.
Now, the Pope was commanding the Army of Virginia. Was that the name of it?
Yeah, the Army of Virginia.
And Burnside had what was the name of his again?
Well, he was commander of the Army of the Potomac at Fredericksburg.
Okay, I thought what I was thinking of, but McClellan, he was still in command of the Potomac at this time, correct? Or
yes, he still had command of the Army of the Potomac. It's a weird situation in replacing generals. Technically, McClellan was still in charge of the Army of the Potomac. He was still in charge of transporting them from the Peninsula into Maryland. However, Lincoln was putting his faith in Pope and was giving him most of these forces, and so he was the main Union commander at this time. even though he was not head of the Army of the Potomac.
Okay.
The Army of Virginia will have some more incarnation, will continue to exist, at least in one form or another. But those corps that was supposed to be transferred to him will go back to the Army of the Potomac.
Okay, that was going to be my next question. What happened to that command after this particular battle?
Yeah, it has a few. It stays together in one form or another. But the Army of the Potomac will again be that main arm of the Union forces.
So what happens to General Pope after this battle?
Oh gosh. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what happens to Pope. He is relieved of command, and if I'm not mistaken, he either gets a desk job, or he may. I don't even want to speculate because I can't even remember what happens to him after the battle.
I can't remember what happened to him either.
I don't think he gets transferred to the West because that doesn't even ring a bell. I think he gets either a desk job or leaves the Army.
Because I had always wondered if, and I guess I just forgot this, the Stonewall and Iron Brigade. I'd always wondered if this, what they considered the shock troops had ever fought in a battle. So this one was it more of a, I've heard you say they kept exchanging fire. Did they ever break into and have close quarter combat, or was it firing at a distance?
This battle was firing at a distance. No reports I've seen indicate any hand-to-hand stuff with those two.
And you said that the Stonewall Brigade had went down to 500 men in the brigade total?
Yeah, after Broner's farm, they had about 800 when they went into the battle. They lost about 300, and so they were down to about 400 or 500 men after Second Manassas. That's why when they go to Antietam, they don't do great service at Antietam because they just don't have the troops to do anything with. And they'll occupy the far left of Lee's line at Antietam and get attacked pretty brutally, and their numbers go down again. And to imagine just another 2 months later, or well, nearly 3, but about 2 months later, they go to Fredericksburg and they're fighting again. This is a bruised and battered group of veterans. Not that they can't fight, but their numbers are dwindling down. They're having to replenish those numbers.
Do they put? That's a question I have. So, do they replenish like with new troops who've never been part of it into this brigade?
Yeah, they will. The Union forces and Confederate forces do. Sometimes they take different routes towards replenishing their forces. Now, the Confederates, what they will do is they will send out an officer from. Let's take the Stonewall Brigade. They'll take an officer from one of their regiments, and they'll send them back to their home area, and they'll raise up more troops and bring them back to that same regiment. So they'll enlist more men. Now, a Union regiment, they might do that, but the Union regiments are more prone to actually form an entire new regiment and bring them into battle. And so
okay.
That's not that that's always what happens, but that's what they're more prone to do. Confederates are more likely to replenish the ranks, while Union forces are more likely to actually just outfit an entirely new regiment.
Was Garnett commanding the Stonewall Brigade at this time?
No, Baylor was. Baylor will either get wounded or killed, and then we'll get Grigsby will take over. By the time the Battle of Antietam is being fought, Grigsby will take over. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, the Stonewall Brigade at Antietam, the brigade will be commanded by a captain, I believe. A brigade is supposed to be commanded by either a colonel or a brigadier general. And by the end of Antietam, the Stonewall Brigade will be commanded by a captain, which is the officer that's supposed to be commanding a company within a regiment, which is within a brigade. So that's a very significant event to take note of, because you're losing all these men. I think we mention this every single time we talk, but it bears repeating every single time, is that when you lose officers, you also lose a lot of morale, and you're losing a lot of that cohesion between regiments and between brigades and divisions.
You were talking about a while ago the coordination and communication between Jackson, Stewart, and Lee, and we talked before about communication breaking down. I mean, How were they able to maintain this type of communication where they were all on the same page? I mean, did that happen in, I can't think of any other campaigns where it happened like that. Did it? I mean,
it's kind of sporadic when you see communication breakdowns in almost every battle. I kind of joke that whenever I do my animated battle maps, there's always miscommunication that leads to a flub up in the battle. And this one, there were some miscommunications. I don't want to make it seem like it was hunky-dory, but it was probably one of the best communicated of the campaigns that you'll ever see, especially for the Confederates. I just got done doing part 4 of the Leonidas Polk series I'm doing, and I'm talking about Shiloh and Perryville. Perryville, between Polk and Bragg, the miscommunication and the simply disobeying of orders makes the Battle of Perryville not turn out the way that the Confederates wanted it. Actually, to a good extent, it didn't turn out the way Bragg wanted it to. Bragg was actually going to be sending his entire army near Frankfort and would be cut off from the south by Don Carlos Buell's army. But nonetheless, communication mishaps are ever present, and I think what signals the Battle of Second Manassas out from the other battles is that Pope gets a lot more miscommunication than the Confederates do, than Lee does, because we see Pope constantly think that he is chasing Jackson and he's fighting a rear guard action, or he's fighting Jackson's rear guard. And he keeps believing this, even up until the day that he's pushed off the field on August 30th. He still thinks that he has found Jackson's rear guard and he's running, and he never has the entire time.
Did Pope not have adequate cavalry or scouts with him?
The cavalry for the Union Army is not mature, has not matured yet.
Okay.
There's some great historians out there that are talking about the maturing of Union cavalry, and I'm part of those historians who discuss Union cavalry and their maturation. This is fairly early in the lives of the Union cavalry. Stuart is still very much outdoing them on many instances. So they haven't got down the proper way of scouting. Not saying they can't, because John Buford is doing really well in this area. Some of the more famous Union cavalry commanders are still very good at what they do. It's just the Confederates are just a little bit ahead of them. And one reason, I think, is just Stuart is a very bold man when it comes to all of his raids, and he has a lot of confidence in himself. And he's able to find this information out for Lee. And if it wasn't for Stuart, this communication would not have been as well. The Pope's information is getting passed around by a lot of commanders. If you watch the animated battle map, you'll see Pope's corps commanders are giving him wrong information as well. I mean, they're slamming up against Jackson, and this is stiff resistance, and they're still claiming, some of them are still claiming this is Jackson's on the run, when Jackson is standing still. So that is a huge breakdown of miscommunication on Pope's part, and I think that's the difference in other campaigns, is the Union have a lot more miscommunication than the Confederates do in this battle.
This Stuart mentioned earlier, his ride around the Union Army, his first time riding through. The ride around the Union Army, is this something that's commonplace with Cavaliers, or was he doing it to kind of taunt them and that he could? I mean, did it actually bring valuable information back?
Oh, he brought back a lot of valuable information. When he does his first ride around the Union Army on the Peninsula, Stuart is able to inform Lee exactly where the Union Army is dug in at, where he can attack. He's ran through, the Union Army has burned bridges. He actually, a bridge is destroyed. He actually builds a bridge. In the middle of this raid, he builds a bridge, goes across it, and then burns what he just built so that they can't chase after him. And so he rides through through and around the Union McClellan's army on the Peninsula, and brings back the exact information that Lee needs to fight McClellan and push him off the Peninsula. And again, Lee is not outright winning these battles in the 7 Days battle. He's slamming up against McClellan, and McClellan, for lack of a better word, is getting scared, and he's pulling back. He basically holds off the Confederates from a bunch of these engagements, but just keeps pulling back and moving back down the peninsula. But it's because of Stuart that he's able to do so. And the ride around McClellan's army is what gets Lee solidly on Stuart's side, and that's why he trusts him so much, and that's why we run into the Gettysburg campaign, which we've discussed before, and I've got a video on of why Lee put so much trust into Stuart and why Stuart did what he did. If it wasn't for Stuart and his cavalry, Lee would be blind, and that's the only reason that Lee was able to defeat Pope at this battle, because I do believe if Stuart hadn't have thwarted those two Union corps coming down that road to the south, that Longstreet would have had to have dealt with them, and it would have been a different story. Now, would the Union have won? I don't know, but it would have been a completely different battle at that point.
I mean, that was some pretty quick thinking on his behalf. Not even know if that's going to work. Just cut down trees and try to bring up some dust.
Exactly. Yeah, he really thought quickly on his feet.
I mean, because how do you even know that's going to work? I mean, that's pretty genius or very very smart on his behalf. I remember that story you told about him getting his hat stolen and him stealing the Pope's luggage. I had forgot about that. That was a cool story. I'm glad you brought that back up.
Yeah, it's all for retribution. All for retribution for Union soldiers stealing his hat and cape.
And then another question. We talked about the skirmishes. So was this like a daily kind of jabbing, like two boxers filling each other out in the opening rounds of a fight?
You're talking about the skirmishing leading up to Second Manassas?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. Not only are you having Jackson having some small skirmishes, but because Stuart's having to ride around and find these Union forces and be able to locate them on a map, he's coming in contact with them. So these skirmishes may just be a few shots exchanged from one another, but it's testing out the situation. And that's kind of what Second Manassas was at Broner's farm when the Stonewall Brigade and Iron Brigade meet up. The Iron Brigade doesn't know what they're getting into. They just know there's a Confederate force, and they do think it's actually Stuart's cavalry, the horse artillery, because the Jackson brings up artillery and fires into their flank as they're marching, and so they think it's Stuart's horse artillery because they've kind of sprung up upon them. It came very quickly. And so they don't know what they're doing, and it's a very much a feeling out situation. And once Jackson sees that the Union division is deploying fully against him, he moves all of his men into position, and it becomes a fairly large engagement.
At any point, did Jackson get close to breaking before Longstreet attacked?
There are a few instances, especially with Maxcy Gregg's brigade on Jackson's far left flank. He had reserves, but it was touch and go there for a moment. He finally gets, I think it's Pender's brigade, will actually rush in and plug the hole that the Union busts through. They actually do bust through a significant portion and just kind of lose momentum. But if more troops could have been thrown into that gap, Jackson his entire line would have been thrown off, and Longstreet wouldn't have had a chance to go file in alongside Jackson's right flank and make the grand assault he did on August 30th.
This was kind of like a hammer and anvil type move.
Yeah, it definitely was. Jackson was the anvil, and Longstreet was the hammer. And it's in a weird way because Pope's slamming up against Jackson the anvil, but then the hammer's coming down and hitting right on is going to be hitting right on top of Pope's men.
And then okay, I visualize that now. I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch that because it's been a while since I've seen that Second Manassas video. You talked about Thoroughfare Gap. I remember in the movie Gettysburg. When they talked to Buford about holding Thoroughfare Gap. Is that what they're talking about?
As far as I know, that was actually a made-up portion in the movie. So Buford is not holding off Longstreet at Thoroughfare Gap. That's actually the division of General Ricketts. General Ricketts' division is the one that's holding off Longstreet at Thoroughfare Gap.
Okay, but that something like that did take place where a division was holding Longstreet off during this battle or delaying him?
Yes. Yeah, trying to delay him. And that's why Longstreet doesn't arrive until a little bit later on the 29th.
Okay. Let's see. And so back to that one more question that Hamber and Abel thanks. You said, so this is roughly what, 25,000 men that's going right into hitting Pope?
Yeah, probably about 25,000 men. You're right. It's going to be, just amazes me that they were able to deploy that many men in such a quick amount of time. This is a matter of a couple of hours that they're able to deploy around 20,000 men in the correct locations. Yeah, that's what Longstreet is using.
That is, I mean, that that is amazing that just a few hours they put that many men there. Let's see. I think, and then after this right here, it's when Lee mentioned invading Pennsylvania, or excuse me, Maryland. So you said he lost 7,000 men. This maybe getting a little bit ahead, but I just wanted to ask this one question. They lost a lot of men after this. Was it because conscripts came up, or Thomas the original time they signed on ended?
That was actually in the earlier 62.
Okay.
That's when the Confederates were desperate and did the conscript, which made you sign up for the duration of the war. It's really amazing when you go into the records of these commanders in, February, March, April of 1862, and they're writing the president, they're writing the War Department saying that their enlistments are up. I'm not going to have an army in a month. And so then they do the conscripts, and if you've joined, you're in it for the entire duration. That's a little bit later. That's a little bit earlier in comparison to what we're talking about right now.
They signed up. That's what they signed. They signed up for 90 days or something like that.
Many of them did for a year.
For a year
enlistment. So when the war breaks out in April, they've signed up for a year. Their enlistments are coming up in March and April.
Okay, all right. So that's what I was wondering, because I knew there was a time that they lost. The army had shrunk some because from what Lee had, at the beginning of that campaign, and what he went into Maryland with. The other question I had for you is, you said that Lee reorganized the army. So when he took over, there was no corps command at all. It was just divisions.
It was divisions that were maneuvering against the Union Army.
So that seems like that'd be even more hard for him to maintain command and control with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having just divisions out there, you're having to relay that information to a whole bunch of people. And so we see Beauregard does that right before Shiloh, moves them, puts them into corps. Lee won't put them into a corps just yet. Lee will put them into what they call left and right wings of the army.
Okay.
And so Longstreet has the right wing, Jackson has the left wing.
Oh, I think that's pretty much summed up all the questions that I had. Is there anything you wanted to add to this one before we close it out?
Let's see. Probably the only thing I want to add is that the 7 days battle is, even though it's right before Lee's probably one of arguably his greatest campaigns, I don't think showing Lee in his actual military best is not the 7 days battle. Yes, he's able to drive McClellan off the peninsula. However, he loses, he goes into the 7 days battle with somewhere around 90,000 men, Robert E. Lee does. He loses almost 20,000 in those 7 days, basically. That's wounded and missing and killed altogether, but that's still a huge amount of men. He has crippled a huge force that the Confederates had, just pushing McClellan off. And knowing that, and he's still able to launch that successful campaign just a few weeks later, that I think that attests to the determination of both sides, that they're able to fight these major battles and still fight just weeks later. And so I'll leave the listeners with that kind of tidbit to think about.
I'm going to ask one more question, because you said something you said just clicked in my mind. Do you think that if McClellan had gotten accurate scouting information, he wouldn't have been so quick to move off if he knew they were somewhere, or he had a numerical advantage instead of being outnumbered 3-1?
I would hope so. I hope that he would, if he had gotten the more correct information, he would have stayed instead of being pushed off.
Because you think you're outnumbered 3-1 and somebody slamming into you constantly like that, you're eventually going to break. You would think. I mean,
yeah, I would hope so, and I think he would, because he was always asking for more reinforcements. Whether he was going to use those reinforcements, we don't know. Lincoln just couldn't give him 50,000 extra men. When he was on the peninsula, that would have put him up to like 160, 170,000 men on the peninsula. I mean, when these two armies moved, they became the largest cities in the South.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
All right, man. So next week or 2 weeks from now, you wanted to do Kentucky. What was it again? The politics or
yeah, Kentucky politics and neutrality.
That'd be I'll look forward to that. Because I was thinking you think Davis and Lincoln and then Warren there and then God, I can't think of his name.
Johnson was there.
Yeah, the vice president. Who? God.
Well, no, the vice president for the Confederacy was Alexander Stephens, and he was from Georgia.
No, I mean, he was vice president of the United States. He ran for president. It's further on the tip of my tongue.
Andrew Johnson.
No, with the was the general for the Confederacy.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was Breckinridge.
Breckinridge, yes.
I was a little few years ahead of you. I was like, Andrew Johnson's from North Carolina and then East Tennessee.
Yeah,
not far from where I'm sitting right now.
I couldn't. I mean, I was like, why can I not call his? I could see. I kept wanting to say Bragg. I was like, no, Bragg. I said BR. I could sit there and see Breckinridge. Do you think that because I was having this discussion with somebody the other day, and they said no, something about Davis's ties, but I would have thought that Breckinridge would have been the natural fit to be Confederate president. I mean, vice president, Democratic nominee for president in 1860, and he doesn't get it.
That'd probably be another discussion for another time, but I will say that Davis had the most experience in politics, more so than Breckinridge.
Because he was very young. He was 36 or 37.
Yeah, Davis had been Secretary of War. He had fought in the Mexican War. He had been he's been former military, went to West Point. He was a senator from Mississippi. I mean, he had done a lot of stuff in Washington, D.C., and people knew him all over. But I'll suffice it to say, and this is a good discussion when we have more time to do so, but he was a very moderate person when it came to secession. When the Confederate government was forming together, it was, how best say this, it was fire eaters that broke the states away. But when they start to form a government, they start putting moderates in there. And so Davis and the vice president of the Confederacy, which was Alexander Stephens, were both fairly moderate in response to secession, especially moderate when you consider there's fire eaters out there and they are not as extreme as those.
Yeah, I was surprised. I was reading, I'll say this, maybe we'll do a show about that one time, just the politics and Confederate government and Breckinridge. That Stephens was a member of the, God, now I can't even think of the name of it. The fourth presidential party that was that carried like Tennessee, Kentucky, and
the Constitutional Unionist Party.
Yeah, that's it. God, why can I not remember anything today? Stephen, yeah, I didn't know he was a member of that.
I thought he was a Democrat.
Well, I think
like
he
Davis.
was up until then, but I think because I was reading, it was something I was reading this article, and it had him listed as a member of the Constitutional Union. So I don't know if he. So I think he may have, he was there and then supported that party, so it still had him listed as that.
Might have been.
When he did that, because I was playing around. I was doing a mock 1864 election if Davis had ran for president again, or if the Confederate, did a mock election if there was a actual election. And I had Stevenson challenge him, and Governor Vance from North Carolina, and then PGT Beauregard running. All right, my man. I'm gonna dang, I guess I'm probably gonna wait for that laptop because I don't know if do you think that thing works on a phone that you can use it to edit with?
I'm pretty sure they have an app for it.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it back up and see if they do that. I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna be getting a laptop anyway here soon. I can do all of it, but so I want to get this stuff where I can put different stuff on there. So just one little clip, but man, thanks for doing this again, and I'll get this thing loaded up, and I appreciate all this.
That sounds great. I always thoroughly enjoy it, man.
Oh, I do too, man. This is great. This has been a blast, and it gives me something to study about for next 2 weeks now about the Kentucky politics. Because when you said that about the secessionists and stuff, like here in my state, Alabama, it was the vote was 61-39. I mean, it wasn't, a lot of people think it was just one sided. It wasn't one sided at all.
Mm-hmm. No, it was. I've got a video called "How Popular Was Secession," and it goes into detail. Many of these states were actually pulled towards secession by elites, and sometimes the elections were actually flubbed in order to make secession happen. And so,
oh, really?
Yeah, that happens on a few instances. I think Georgia's one of the more prominent ones.
I'll have to look that up too, because in Winston County, which is about closer up north Alabama, they had a free state of Winston there too, or like some of the others. Of course, it didn't turn out, bloody or anything, but they seceded from everybody and was the really the only county in Alabama stayed Republican until everybody else switched. And in that book, oh God, Harper Lee, I can't think of that name.
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Kill a Mockingbird. Yes, God, I can't remember anything. They asked something about. There was a line in there about. She came over to school and said, "My teacher's a Yankee." And said, "He's from up north." And no, he's from Winston County. All right, man. I'm gonna keep you because I know you got to get up in the morning. But we'll talk very soon, and hopefully my memory will be working better. I need to get me some tuna fish or something, man, because I can't recall anything tonight. All right, Lucas, we'll talk soon, buddy.
See you later, buddy.
Bye.
Bye.